What happens when a teenager walks into court to face humiliation and ends up schooling everyone? What happens next left the judge absolutely speechless. The courtroom smelled like old wood and coffee that had been sitting out since dawn. Those fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a choir of bad decisions, and the cracked leather benches groaned every time someone shifted. If you've never been in one of these rooms, let me paint it for you. Stale air, pale walls that try to look official but just feel cold, and a judge's bench that sits up high like some ancient throne. That's where I was headed, apparently guilty for the crime of existing in the wrong skin, on the wrong street, at the wrong time. My name's Marcus King, 17 years old, born and raised in East Baltimore. Honor student, national debate finalist. Yeah, let that sink in. I'm the kid people think doesn't belong in cuffs. The one teachers say, "You're going places, Marcus." Except today, the only place I was going was the defendant's table, hands cuffed so tight my wrists looked like they were auditioning for a horror movie. But let me rewind for a second. This whole circus started 3 nights ago, and like all good disasters, it began with me trying to do the right thing. It was Thursday evening, sun dipping low like it owed somebody money, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I was walking home from my after-school tutoring gig, earbuds in, Kendrick Lamar preaching about survival in America. That's when I saw him, my little brother, Jamal, all of 13, standing in the corner store parking lot with 2 older kids I didn't recognize. And trust me, in our neighborhood, unfamiliar faces can mean trouble. I pulled out my earbuds, speed-walking like a man with a mission. "Yo, Jay, what you doing out here?" I called out. He looked like a deer in headlights. One of the older boys smirked, the kind of smirk that says, "Yeah, I'm about to ruin your day for sport." "Your brother?" the kid asked, stepping forward like he owned the concrete under his sneakers. "Man, we just talking business." I didn't like his tone. I didn't like his hands stuffed in that oversized hoodie either. "Funny," I said, "because Jamal don't got no business at 10 o'clock at night unless it's in a math book." The kid laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. Jamal shuffled behind me, and that told me everything I needed to know. "Look," I said, "whatever this is, it ends now." Now, I'm not the kind of guy who goes looking for fights. I believe in brains over fists. But life has a funny way of testing your beliefs. The smirk turned into a grin, and before I knew it, the kid stepped in my space like he wanted to make me a cautionary tale. So I did what any big brother would do. I planted my feet and stared him down. "You deaf or just stupid?" I asked, voice steady, heart doing backflips. He flinched first. Guess he didn't expect a kid in a cardigan and loafers to have a spine. Jamal tugged on my sleeve, whispering, "Let's go, Marcus." And we almost made it out clean, almost, when a spotlight hit us like we were actors in the worst reality show ever made. "Hands where I can see 'em," the voice boomed from behind us. 2 cops stepped out of their cruiser, flashlights in our eyes, guns on their hips like the law was about to drop an album. The older one had a gut that said donuts were his love language, and the younger one had that rookie glow, the kind that screams, "I watched every episode of Cops, and I've been dying for this moment." "What's going on here?" Donut King barked. "Nothing," I said, raising my hands. "Just taking my brother home." "Your brother?" Rookie echoed, eyeing Jamal like he was some rare species. "You sure about that?" Now, I don't know what that was supposed to mean, but my blood pressure started writing its own horror story. "Yeah, I'm sure," I said. "We got the same mom, same address, same everything." You want a birth certificate? Wrong move. Sarcasm doesn't pair well with badges. The older cop's face tightened, like I'd just insulted his grandma. Step forward, he ordered. Both of you. I did, slowly, keeping my voice calm because, in situations like this, calm can be the difference between walking home and not walking at all. Look, officers, there's no problem here. Shut it, Rookie snapped. Hands on the hood, now. And just like that, I was face first on cold metal, Jamal shaking like a leaf next to me. They patted us down like we were hiding nuclear codes in our socks. Then came the questions. Where are you coming from? Who you here to meet? You slinging something? No, I said through clenched teeth. I was tutoring. You can call my school. Oh, a tutor, Donut King sneered. What are you, some kind of genius? I almost laughed, but my ribs were protesting under his grip. Something like that, I muttered. Next thing I knew, cuffs clicked around my wrists. You're under arrest for loitering and resisting. Resisting? I twisted my neck to glare at him. Resisting what? Gravity? Keep talking, Rookie said. See where it gets you. So here I am, 3 days later, sitting in a courtroom that smells like history and hypocrisy. My mom's in the back row, wringing her hands like prayer is the only weapon she's got left. Jamal's next to her, eyes big enough to swallow the world. And me? I'm in an orange jumpsuit that clashes with my skin tone, trying to remember every deep breath exercise my therapist taught me. The bailiff calls the session to order, voice booming like it owns the air. Then he says the name I've heard all week, Honorable Judge William R. Holbrook, presiding. And in walks Holbrook, white hair slicked back like it's scared of the future, robe swaying like a cape. He's the kind of man who probably thinks jazz died when Sinatra retired. His face? All sharp lines and sharper judgments. And the way he looks at me, like I'm a math problem he already solved and didn't like the answer. Mr. King, he says, voice dripping with that fake Southern courtesy that makes you feel like you're being stabbed with a butter knife. Quite a situation you found yourself in. I force a smile. Guess so, Your Honor. He leans back in his chair, steepling his fingers like some cartoon villain. Tutoring, was it? That your story? Yes, sir. He chuckles. Not a belly laugh, not even amused. Just that condescending little sound people make when they think they know better. Well, isn't that precious? The courtroom titters. And right then, something inside me snaps. Not anger, not fear. Something colder, like a switch flipping. Because I know what this is. Not justice, not fairness. It's theater. And I'm supposed to play the fool. But here's the thing about me. I don't do fool. Judge Holbrook tilted his head like a man examining a broken toy. His eyes swept over me slowly. Orange jumpsuit, shackles on my ankles, calloused hands resting on the table like I had built this courtroom brick by brick. The whole room was quiet, except for the soft squeak of someone's chair and the distant hum of an air vent trying to keep the temperature civil. So, Holbrook said, his voice rich with smugness, you expect me to believe that a young man— What did you say your age was again? 17, I replied evenly, though my pulse was playing a drum solo in my throat. 17, he repeated, rolling the number on his tongue like a bad wine. A teenager, out past 10 o'clock at night, in a neighborhood known for, shall we say, extracurricular activities. And your defense is that you were tutoring? His eyebrows rose so high, I thought they might leave his forehead entirely. Yes, sir. My tone was calm, but inside I wanted to scream, What? You've never heard of a black kid tutoring before? Does my skin tone automatically subtract 50 IQ points in your book? Holbrook leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. And tell me, Mr. King, who exactly were you tutoring at that hour? My friend's little sister, I said, voice steady. She had an algebra test. I help kids with math. That earned me a few murmurs from the gallery, like I'd just confessed to being a unicorn. Holbrook smirked, the kind of smirk that makes you want to punch something. Well, isn't that noble? He said dryly. A regular Good Samaritan. His tone dripped sarcasm like honey from a broken jar. I opened my mouth to respond, but my public defender, a guy named Lawson who looked like he'd rather be golfing, placed a hand on my arm. A silent warning, don't talk, don't make waves. But here's the thing, waves are all I've got left. Behind me, the courtroom audience buzzed like flies on rotten fruit. Some folks were here for their own cases, others just for the drama. Baltimore courtrooms are like free matinee shows for people who can't afford cable. You get your usual characters, the nosy old ladies clutching their handbags, a couple of bored cops pretending not to eavesdrop, and that one guy who looks like he bets on court outcomes the way people bet on horses. Holbrook tapped his gavel lightly, just enough to remind everyone who owned the oxygen in this room. Quiet, please, he said, though his smirk told me he loved the attention. Mr. King, he continued, you seem like an intelligent young man. At least, that's the story you're selling. So I have to wonder, if you're as bright as you claim, why on earth were you in that situation to begin with? He tilted his head again, like a predator circling wounded prey. I swallowed hard. I was walking my brother home. Oh, there's a brother now, Holbrook said, feigning surprise. My, the plot thickens. The gallery chuckled. Even the court reporter cracked a smile as her fingers danced over the keys. And in that moment, something inside me twisted. Not just anger, not just humiliation. It was deeper than that. It was the weight of every headline, every viral video, every story that started just like mine and ended in a grave or a cell. You're not gonna break me, I thought. Not today. The prosecutor, Miss Karen Whitfield, because, of course, her name was Karen, stood up in her navy blue power suit, clutching a file like it contained the secrets of the universe. Her heels clicked on the tile as she approached the bench. Your Honor, the state would like to submit Exhibit A, she announced. Holbrook gestured lazily. Proceed. She opened the folder and pulled out a series of photos. These were taken the night of the arrest. As you can see, Mr. King was in close proximity to known gang affiliates. She slapped the photos down on the table in front of me. There I was, grainy and overexposed under a streetlight, standing near the two kids who'd been giving Jamal trouble. I wasn't touching them. I wasn't even facing them. But in black and white, with the right angle, guilt is just a matter of imagination. Your Honor, Karen continued, this is a textbook example of loitering with intent, coupled with the defendant's resistance during detainment. Objection, Lawson piped up, sounding like a man who objected mostly to being awake. My client did not resist. Holbrook raised a brow. Is that so? Yes, Your Honor, Lawson said, flipping through his notes like maybe the truth was hiding in there somewhere. The officer's own report indicates that Mr. King complied with all verbal commands. Karen smirked, after asking them if they were deaf. The gallery laughed again. Holbrook chuckled, and I felt heat crawl up my neck like fire ants. So now sarcasm is a crime? Great. Guess half the country better lawyer up. Holbrook leaned forward, fixing me with a gaze sharp enough to cut glass. Tell me, Mr. King, do you find this amusing? No, sir, I said, my voice flat as Kansas. Because you're smiling. Was I? Damn. Maybe it was a nervous tic. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity of being treated like a cartel boss for walking home with my brother. Either way, Holbrook wasn't having it. Wipe that grin off your face, he snapped. You think this is a joke? You're facing serious charges. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted iron. Understood, Your Honor. He sat back, satisfied like a cat after clawing the curtains. Good. Because if you were my son, I'd be ashamed. That one hit like a sucker punch. Not because I cared what Holbrook thought, but because I could feel my mother's pain radiating from the back row like heat from a furnace. She raised me better than good. She raised me to believe in rules that weren't made for me. And here was this man, this stranger, acting like he held the patent on morality. You ever had a moment where the world slows down and every sound turns into static? That was me, right then. Sitting there in chains, listening to a man in a black robe question my worth like it was his birthright. My fingers curled into fists under the table, nails digging crescents into my palms. Stay calm, Marcus. Breathe. This is what they want. They want you to snap so they can say, "See? Told you he was trouble." But another voice, low and simmering, whispered, "They don't know who they're dealing with." Not yet. Holbrook wasn't done. Oh no. Men like him never are. He leaned back in his chair, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. You know, Mr. King, I've seen a lot of young men like you come through this courtroom. Bright futures wasted because they couldn't make good choices, because they thought they were smarter than the system. He paused for effect, letting the words marinate like bad barbecue. And do you know where they are now? Prison. Or worse. The gallery murmured again, like a church choir chiming in on cue. I tilted my head, meeting his gaze dead on. With all due respect, Your Honor, I said slowly, I didn't think I was smarter than the system. Oh? Holbrook arched an eyebrow. And what did you think? I let the silence stretch just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I said, I thought the system was supposed to be smarter than this. Gasps. Actual gasps. The sound rippled through the courtroom like a dropped glass in a fancy restaurant. Karen's jaw tightened. Lawson looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. And Holbrook? His face turned a shade of red that made me wonder if he had a blood pressure cuff hidden under that robe. Holbrook's jaw tightened like a vice. His fingers drummed on the bench, a sharp tap, tap, tap that echoed in the dead air of the courtroom. For a split second, I thought he might laugh it off, make some dry comment about youthful arrogance, and move on. But no, Holbrook wasn't the type to let a jab slide. Not from someone like me. His lips curled into something that almost resembled a smile, but not the kind that warms a room. This one could frost glass. You thought the system was supposed to be smarter, he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. Well, congratulations, Mr. King. You've just demonstrated why it isn't. The gallery chuckled like trained seals, eager for scraps of superiority. I could feel their eyes on me, heavy with judgment and something uglier. The kind of look that says, you'll never be more than this. I sat still, breathing slow. On the outside, I was calm as a lake at dawn. On the inside, hurricanes. Holbrook straightened his robe like a man preparing for battle. Let me explain something to you, son, he began, leaning forward with his elbows on the bench. This isn't about what you think the system should be. This is about what it is. And what it is order, rules, boundaries. Without those, society falls apart. People like you fall apart. People like me, I echoed softly, tasting the words like poison. His eyes narrowed, catching the edge in my tone. Yes, people who think they can bend the rules, talk their way out of consequences, play the victim when things don't go their way. I wanted to laugh, out loud, because if this wasn't a masterclass in irony, I didn't know what was. Play the victim? I was cuffed, chained, and being lectured by a man whose ego could have its own zip code. But sure, I was the problem. "Do you understand me, Mr. King?" he asked, voice rising like a tide. I met his gaze and gave the smallest nod. "Crystal clear, Your Honor." He smirked, thinking he'd won. "Good. Maybe you'll learn something before this is over." Lawson cleared his throat, finally remembering he existed. "Your Honor, if I may?" "You may not," Holbrook snapped, cutting him off like a bad haircut. "I've heard enough excuses. The facts are plain. This young man was in the wrong place, at the wrong time with the wrong crowd. And now, he wants to play philosopher in my courtroom." Wrong crowd? I clenched my jaw so hard it could have cracked glass. Jamal wasn't a crowd. He was my little brother, the kid I'd practically raised when Mom worked double shifts. But Holbrook didn't care. Guys like him never do. To him, we're statistics in sneakers, walking cautionary tales. Lawson sat back, defeated. Some lawyer. He hadn't fought for me. He'd barely fought gravity to stay upright. It hit me then, like a punch to the gut. If I wanted a chance in hell, I'd have to fight this myself. Holbrook wasn't done with his show. Oh no, men like him thrive on an audience. He leaned back in his chair, voice booming so even the dust motes could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is a perfect example of why our youth are failing. Disrespect, poor choices, lack of accountability." He gestured toward me like I was Exhibit A in a museum of disappointment. "This young man thinks he's smarter than the system. Well, I have news for him, and for all the young people watching, the law will always win." The gallery nodded like a congregation at Sunday service. Phones buzzed quietly as someone probably live-tweeted my humiliation. I imagined the hashtags, "A courtroom drama," "Chuck, know your place." Holbrook turned back to me, eyes gleaming with that special kind of cruelty that only comes from unchecked power. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, Mr. King? Something intelligent, perhaps?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. Not because I was scared, because I was calculating. Timing is everything. And right now, silence was louder than any speech. You ever feel your whole life balancing on a pinhead? That was me, right there. One wrong word, and I'm a headline. Teen explodes in courtroom meltdown. One wrong move, and I'm a statistic, a cautionary tale they teach in seminars about urban risk factors. But then there's the other voice, the one that's been with me since I was old enough to notice how tilted the board is. The voice that says, "They expect you to fold. They expect you to break. So don't." Holbrook sighed, like this whole ordeal had personally inconvenienced him. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, voice thick with self-importance. "Bail is set at $10,000. The words hit like a sucker punch. 10 grand? Might as well have said $1 million. My mom worked 2 jobs and still had to choose between groceries and the electric bill some months. $10,000 was a cruel joke. I glanced back at her. She looked small, folded in on herself, clutching her purse like maybe it held a miracle. Jamal's hand gripped hers so tight his knuckles turned white. Holbrook wasn't done. "Until bail is posted, the defendant will remain in juvenile detention." The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like the world ending. And just like that, my life tilted on its axis. The bailiff grabbed my arm, yanking me up like I was a rag doll. My chains clinked, loud enough to drown out the murmurs from the gallery. I walked past Holbrook without looking at him, because if I did, I might say something that would get me buried under the jail. As they led me toward the holding cell, I caught Mom's eyes. Wet, red, full of 1,000 apologies she didn't owe me. I gave her a nod, the smallest promise I could make. I got this, Ma. Somehow, I got this. Behind me, Holbrook's voice echoed like a bad dream. Next case. But here's the thing nobody saw coming. Not Holbrook, not Karen, not the peanut gallery. They thought this was the end of the story. They thought they'd broken me. They had no idea the game was just getting started. The fluorescent lights in the detention center hummed like a bad memory. The kind that lingers even after you've done everything to shake it. My cell was 8 feet by 10, with walls the color of disappointment, and a bed that felt like it had been designed by someone who hated humanity. A metal toilet sat in the corner, mocking me with its cold indifference. 3 nights in this place, and I'd memorized every crack in the concrete floor. 3 nights of listening to the kid in the next cell cry himself to sleep, his sobs echoing like a siren in the dark. 3 nights of wondering how fast a dream can turn into a nightmare. But here's the thing. Nightmares don't scare me anymore. People do. Systems do. And right now, I was trapped inside one that looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't matter." The ride over had been its own brand of hell. Me, shackled in the back of a squad car, watching the city blur past through a dirty window streaked with fingerprints. Baltimore looked different from inside a cage. Grayer, colder, like someone had drained the color out of it. The 2 officers in the front didn't bother to talk to me, but their silence spoke volumes. Every now and then, Rookie glanced at me in the rearview mirror, like he expected me to sprout horns and confess to a triple homicide. "Comfortable back there?" he asked finally, smirk curling his lips. "Like a 5-star hotel," I shot back, "if the stars stood for roaches and bad life choices." His smirk died, and I called that a small win. Now I was sitting on the edge of the cot, elbows on my knees, staring at the gray cinder-block wall like it might offer answers. Spoiler alert. It didn't. The only thing that kept me from unraveling was the thought of Mom and Jamal. Mom's face when the gavel came down, that look of quiet devastation, like the world had kicked her in the teeth one too many times. And Jamal, man, the kid was already blaming himself. I saw it in his eyes, that guilt, heavy and sharp. He shouldn't have to carry that weight. Not for me. The door clanged open, jerking me out of my thoughts. A guard stepped in, keys jangling like bad music. "Lawson's here," he grunted. Great. The human embodiment of mediocrity. They took me to a room that looked like it had auditioned for a crime drama and didn't make the cut. Lawson was already there, sitting at a metal table, his cheap suit wrinkled like it had fought a war and lost. He looked up when I walked in, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus," he said, standing halfway before thinking better of it, "how are you holding up?" I sat down across from him, chains clinking like punctuation marks. "Living the dream," I said flatly. "How's your golf swing?" He sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair. "Listen, I know this isn't ideal." "Ideal?" I cut in, leaning forward. "Lawson, ideal would be me at home, helping my brother with homework instead of sitting in a cell because 2 cops got bored." He held up his hands like I was pointing a gun at him. "I get it, okay? But sarcasm isn't going to help us right now. Funny, because neither was he. Lawson pulled out a manila folder like it was a magic trick. I've reviewed the case file. The prosecution's leaning hard on those photos. They're painting a picture of you as someone who— Who what? I snapped. Who walks down the wrong street while black? His face tightened. Look, don't make this harder than it already is. I think the best option is to push for a plea deal. I stared at him, blinking slowly like maybe I'd misheard. A plea deal? Yes, he said, adjusting his tie that didn't need adjusting. If you plead guilty to loitering and resisting, they'll probably drop the rest. You could be out in 6 months, maybe less with good behavior. I laughed. Out loud. The sound bounced off the walls like broken glass. 6 months? For walking home with my brother? Marcus. No, I said sharply, cutting him off. I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do. He rubbed his temples like I was the problem here. If you fight this, the judge could throw the book at you. Then I'll read it, I shot back. Maybe it'll be more useful than you. That earned me a glare, but I didn't care. I was done playing nice, done letting people talk over me like my life was a minor inconvenience. When they dragged me back to my cell, I sat on that cold cot and stared at the ceiling until the cracks started looking like road maps. A plea deal? No, not happening. If Holbrook wanted a fight, I'd give him one. Not with fists, with words, with facts, with every ounce of knowledge I'd crammed into my head over 17 years of being told I had to work twice as hard to get half as far. By the time the guard came to escort me to the next hearing, my plan was crystallizing like sugar in a jar. If Lawson wasn't going to fight for me, I'd fight for myself. When they brought me back into Holbrook's courtroom, it was like déjà vu, only worse. The same pale walls, the same smug faces in the gallery, the same judge sitting up there like he was carved out of arrogance. Mom was in the back row again, eyes red, clutching her purse like it might stop the world from falling apart. Jamal sat next to her, shoulders hunched, guilt dripping off him like rain. I sat down at the defendant's table, chains cold against my wrists, and waited for the circus to start. Holbrook adjusted his glasses, peering down at me like I was a science experiment gone wrong. "Mr. King," he said, voice smooth as sandpaper, "I trust you've had time to reflect on your choices." "Plenty," I said. "It's amazing what a concrete box does for your thinking." His lips twitched, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Good. Karen strutted up to the bench, heels clicking like a metronome of doom. "Your Honor, the state is prepared to proceed. We have additional witnesses who can testify to the defendant's behavior the night of the incident." Holbrook nodded, like a man settling in for a good show. "Very well. Call your first witness." They dragged in one of the kids from that night, the smirker with the hoodie. He looked nervous, eyes darting everywhere but me. Karen grilled him like a steak, feeding him questions so loaded they could have exploded on impact. "Did the defendant appear aggressive?" she asked. Yeah, a little," Hoodie Boy mumbled. "Aggressive? Me? The kid who wouldn't swat a fly without apologizing first." My hands curled into fists under the table. That was it. The moment the switch flipped. I wasn't just angry. I was incandescent. Because this wasn't a trial. It was theater. A script written before I ever stepped on stage. And I was done playing the villain in their little morality play. I leaned toward Lawson, voice low and sharp. "Fire yourself," he blinked. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "You're done." "Marcus, that's not how this works." "It is now," I hissed. "Tell the judge." His face went pale, like I'd asked him to commit a felony. "You can't just— Watch me." Lawson stared at me like I'd just confessed to robbing Fort Knox. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, searching for words that apparently didn't exist. "You're out of your mind," he whispered harshly. "This isn't a debate club, Marcus. This is a courtroom." "Then it's a good thing I've won plenty of debates," I shot back, my voice calm as ice. "Tell the judge, Lawson, or I will." Before he could sputter out another objection, I stood. The chains around my wrists clinked like a warning bell, and the entire courtroom shifted in their seats, the air tightening like a noose. Even Holbrook looked mildly intrigued, though he hid it under a mask of disdain. "Your Honor," I said, loud enough to carry to the back row, "I'd like to exercise my right to represent myself." The gallery erupted into whispers, a low tidal wave of "Did he just say that?" Holbrook slammed his gavel so hard the sound ricocheted off the walls. "Order!" he barked, his gaze locked onto me, sharp as a blade. "Mr. King, this is highly irregular." "Not illegal," I countered smoothly. "Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to self-representation. Ferretta versus California, 1975. Look it up." Karen's head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing like I'd just pulled a gun. Holbrook blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. He hadn't expected me to know that case. Hell, he probably thought I didn't know what amendment meant. "You've been studying," Holbrook said finally, his tone laced with contempt. "But representing yourself is a fool's errand." "Maybe," I said with a shrug, "but it's my errand." Holbrook leaned back, steepling his fingers like he was about to deliver a TED Talk on bad decisions. "Very well," he said after a long pause. "If you insist on digging your own grave, I won't stop you. Mr. Lawson, you're dismissed." Lawson hesitated, glancing between us like a man watching a train wreck in slow motion. Then he gathered his papers and slunk out, leaving me alone at the defendant's table. Alone, but not unarmed. "Ms. Whitfield," Holbrook said, turning to Karen with a smirk, "it seems we're in for some entertainment." Karen smiled thinly, the kind of smile that says, "I'm about to make you regret every life choice that led you here." She gathered her notes like a soldier checking her ammo. "Your Honor," she said sweetly, "the state is ready to proceed." Karen approached the witness stand, her heels slicing through the silence. Hoodie Boy sat there, fidgeting like a kid caught cheating on a test. She launched into her questions, each one carefully designed to paint me as the villain in a bad after-school special. "Did the defendant appear hostile that night?" she asked, voice dripping with false sympathy. "I guess," Hoodie Boy muttered. "He was, intense." "Intense," Karen repeated, nodding as if she'd just cracked the Da Vinci Code. "Would you say you felt threatened?" Yeah, kinda." She smiled like a cat that had cornered a mouse. "No further questions." My turn. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate, like a chess player lining up the board. The chains clinked as I walked to the podium, but I didn't let them slow me down. If anything, they were part of the theater. Let them see the cuffs. Let them see what injustice looks like. "Mr. Bryant," I began, voice smooth as glass. "That's your name, right?" He nodded nervously. "Yeah. You said I seemed intense? Can you define that?" He blinked. Like serious. Focused." "So not angry?" I pressed. "Not yelling? Not making threats?" "No," he admitted reluctantly. "But, your tone—" "Did I touch you?" I cut in. "No." "Did I raise my voice?" "No." "Did I make any threats, verbal or physical?" He squirmed. "No." "Thank you." I turned to the judge, my expression calm. No further questions. A ripple of murmurs ran through the gallery. Karen's jaw tightened, and Holbrook's smirk faltered just a hair. Score one for the kid in chains. Holbrook wasn't about to let me have the last word. "Mr. King," he said, his tone sharp as barbed wire, "this isn't a game. If you think a few clever questions will save you, you're sorely mistaken." "With respect, Your Honor," I replied evenly, "I don't think anything will save me, except the truth." Gasps rippled through the room like wind through dry leaves. Holbrook's face flushed crimson, and for a second I thought he might actually throw the gavel at my head. Karen launched her next salvo with a witness from the police department. Rookie himself. He strutted to the stand like a man who'd been waiting his whole life for this spotlight. His testimony was everything you'd expect. Twisted, polished, designed to turn me into a monster. The defendant was uncooperative, Rookie declared, puffing out his chest. He was sarcastic, disrespectful, and his body language indicated aggression. Aggression. The word hung in the air like a noose. I let him talk, let him dig his own grave with every syllable. When my turn came, I walked up slow, eyes locked on his. "Officer Daniels," I began, "how long have you been on the force?" 18 months, he said proudly. 18 months, I repeated. "So you're new?" "Not that new," he shot back. "Fair enough," I said with a shrug. "Now, when you say my body language indicated aggression, can you define that?" He frowned. "You were tense." "Tense?" I echoed. "Would you be tense if someone shoved you against a car and cuffed you for walking home?" Objection from Karen, sustained by Holbrook. "Fine," I pivoted. "Did I swing at you, Officer Daniels?" "No." "Did I curse at you?" "No." "Did I make any threats?" "No." "So the aggression," I said slowly, "was in your imagination?" The gallery erupted in whispers. Rookie's face turned red, and Karen leapt to her feet, sputtering objections like fireworks. Holbrook slammed the gavel until the echoes drowned her out. By the time we adjourned for the day, the tension in that room was thick enough to choke on. Holbrook glared at me like he wanted to carve my name into the court's blacklist. Karen looked like she was plotting my assassination via legal briefs. And me? I walked out in chains, but for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt free. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting. I sat in the holding cell that night, replaying every word, every glance, every ripple of shock in that courtroom. They thought I was a kid out of his depth. They thought this was checkmate. They had no idea the game was just getting interesting. The third day in court smelled like rain and tension. Storm clouds gathered outside, turning the tall windows into gray mirrors. Inside, the air was thick, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The gallery was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway, reporters squeezed in with cameras ready, sensing that this case had transformed from local gossip to front-page drama. And me? I sat at the defendant's table, chains biting into my wrists, but head high, spine straight, eyes steady. Because today wasn't about survival. Today was about the kill shot. Holbrook took his bench, with the same smug air he always had. Only this time, I saw it. The tiny crack in his confidence. Yesterday shook him. The kid he tried to humiliate turned out to have teeth. Karen was ready for blood. She strutted in with a new navy suit, darker, sharper, like a shark circling its prey. Her briefcase slammed onto the table like a gavel of doom. She smiled at me, all teeth, no warmth. "Ready to lose, counselor," she whispered as she passed. I smiled back. "Thought I'd let you handle that part." Holbrook banged his gavel. "Court is in session. Mr. King, since you insist on representing yourself, you may proceed with your defense." I rose slowly, deliberately, letting the chains clink loud enough for the microphones to catch. Drama, baby. If they wanted a show, I'd give them a masterpiece. Your Honor, I began, voice calm, resonant, carrying to the farthest row. Today, we're not just deciding my fate. We're deciding whether truth still matters in this room. A ripple ran through the gallery. Karen rolled her eyes. Holbrook's jaw tightened. "Officer Daniels!" I called, my voice slicing through the air. Rookie swaggered back to the stand, chest puffed like a parade balloon. He adjusted the mic, smirked like he owned the room. "Officer," I said, pacing slowly, every eye tracking me. "Yesterday, you testified that my body language was aggressive, correct?" "Yes." "And you also said I didn't curse, didn't make threats, didn't resist physically?" "Correct." "So, your definition of aggression is standing still while black?" "Objection." Karen's voice cracked like a whip. "Your Honor, that's inflammatory." "Sustained," Holbrook barked. "Mr. King, watch your tone." I turned to him, expression cool. "With respect, Your Honor, tone seems to be the only crime I committed." Gasps, murmurs, a stifled laugh from the back row. Holbrook slammed his gavel again, but the damage was done. "Officer," I continued, unshaken, "you also wrote in your report that you feared for your safety." "Yes." "Against an unarmed teenager in a cardigan?" His face flushed. "It was dark. I had to make a judgment call." "Right," I said, nodding thoughtfully. "So your judgment call was based on what? My skin tone? My zip code? Or the fact that two board officers needed action to spice up their shift?" "Objection. Overruled this time." Holbrook hesitated just a beat too long. The gallery ate it up. "Nothing further," I said, returning to my table like a general after winning a skirmish. Karen was seething. She pulled out her final card, a grainy video from a convenience store camera, showing me standing near Hoodie Boy that night. "As you can see," she said, voice smug, "the defendant is loitering with known affiliates." "Your Honor," I said, standing before she could sit, "may I approach?" Holbrook waved a hand, irritated. "Make it quick." I took the flash drive, plugged it in, and let the footage roll. Then I froze it on a single frame. Me, glancing at my watch, Jamal tugging on my sleeve, my backpack slung over one shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, turning to the jury, "this is their smoking gun. A kid checking the time because his mom is waiting at home. A brother guiding his sibling away from trouble. If that's a crime, then maybe we should arrest every parent who's ever said, 'Don't talk to strangers.'" Karen opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. "And since we're talking evidence," I held up a stack of papers, the product of last night's insomnia and a dusty law library. "Let's talk about something the state forgot to mention. Those two kids, they've got prior records for vandalism and petty theft, which means when the officers saw them, they assumed guilt and painted me with the same brush." Gasps again. Phones buzzed. Reporters scribbled like their pens were on fire. Karen sputtered. "Objection! That's hearsay." "Not when it's public record," I shot back, waving the stamped documents. Holbrook's face darkened, but he couldn't stop me. Not without making it obvious whose side he was on. I walked to the center of the courtroom, chains dragging like punctuation marks on history. My voice dropped low, steady, every syllable sharp enough to draw blood. This case isn't about loitering. It's not about safety. It's about perception. About a system that sees a black kid in a hoodie and writes the ending before the story begins. Well, guess what? I'm writing my own ending. The room was silent, hanging on every word. I'm 17. honor student, debate champion, the son of a woman who works herself to the bone so her boys can have a shot at something better. And I refuse. Do you hear me? I refuse to let this system turn me into another headline. I turned to Holbrook, locking eyes with him so hard the air crackled. You wanted a lesson, Judge? Here it is. Justice isn't about power. It's about truth. And the truth is, you were wrong about me. You could have heard a pin drop. The jury deliberated for 2 hours, but I knew the second they walked back in. You can read verdicts in body language if you know where to look. Shoulders relaxed, eyes soft. Hope creeping in like sunlight under a locked door. Not guilty on all counts, the foreman said. For a moment, time stopped. Then the sound hit. Cheers from the gallery, reporters shouting questions, my mother sobbing into her hands, Jamal clinging to her like he'd never let go. Holbrook banged his gavel, face pale as ash. Order! Order! But there was no order. Not anymore. The bailiff unclipped my chains, and for the first time in weeks, my wrists felt like they belonged to me again. I stood tall, straightened my prison-issue jumpsuit, and turned to Holbrook. Thank you, Your Honor, I said, voice smooth as silk. I'll send you a copy of my law school application. The gallery erupted again. Holbrook's face. Priceless. I walked out of that courtroom like a king, not because I won, but because I refused to lose. Outside, cameras flashed, microphones shoved in my face, questions flying like bullets. But all I cared about was Mom's arms around me, Jamal's voice in my ear whispering, "You did it." No, kid, we did it. And as the storm outside finally broke, rain washing the city clean, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.